Imagine your whole life reduced to numbers on bamboo slips. Fields plowed, heads taken, taxes paid, your personal survival dashboard. In that world, one small western state called Qin somehow beats six rivals and turns itself into the first Chinese empire. Most of us meet Qin through Qin Shi Huang, wall builder, book burner, immortality chaser. Basically history's most intense project manager. But this story asks a different question. What if the real main character wasn't the emperor, but the operating system behind him? Qin looks less like a heroic kingdom and more like a brutal OS, installed early and updated constantly through war and reform. It turned farmers into soldiers, nobles into regular taxpayers, and neighbors into informants, all running on law codes and incentives. That system unified China in barely 10 years, and then helped the dynasty collapse in around 15. Impressive and terrifying, right? To understand how, we'll zoom out. Geography, weird reforms, industrial-scale war, insane construction projects, and one very obsessive emperor. First, we need to load the map. 3rd century BCE China, better known as the Warring States version of a never-ending battle royale. 7 major players, dozens of minors, alliances forming and collapsing faster than group chats. And one rustic western state nobody respected. Most people lived on the Central Plains, where states like Zhao, Wei, and Han glared at each other across flat, crowded farmland. Qin, by contrast, sat out west in the Guanzhong Basin, wrapped in mountains and passes with thick, loess soil and rivers. Those passes were natural firewalls. Enemies could invade only through narrow choke points where Qin could stack soldiers and watchtowers efficiently. Its yellow, loess soil eroded easily, but when irrigated, it produced serious grain, exactly what a permanent war economy needs. To refined Eastern elites, Qin looked rough. Fewer polished scholars, more straight-talking generals and farmers. Basically, the countryside cousin at reunions. But that uncultured stereotype hid something important. A culture already leaning toward practicality, discipline, and military service over elegant speeches. Meanwhile, the old Zhou feudal order was collapsing. Noble titles meant less, and everyone scrambled to invent new ways to rule. States experimented. New taxes, universal conscription, land reforms, even early versions of bureaucracies. Anything to squeeze more soldiers and grain. Some rulers bet on moral persuasion and rituals. Confucian scholars preaching virtue, harmony, and proper ceremony as tools of governance. Others bet on charismatic generals and clever diplomacy, hoping heroic victories and surprise alliances would save them from stronger neighbors. Qin made a colder bet. Written laws, hard statistics, and punishments clear enough to scare everyone into playing by its rules. To upgrade that system, Qin hired a man who treated politics like engineering. The reformer Shang Yang, a professional destroyer of privileges. Shang Yang arrived in Qin with one big idea. Stop rewarding bloodlines. Start rewarding results and measure almost everything. Traditional nobles were horrified. Under his plan, hereditary fiefs and tax breaks would shrink, while commoners gained chances through war and farming. But Shang Yang had another problem. Why would ordinary people believe any new law in a world full of broken promises? So he staged a demo. He set a tall wooden log by the south gate of the capital and posted a challenge. Anyone who carried that log to the north gate, he declared, would receive 10 gold pieces. Absurd money for light exercise. People laughed. If the government offers easy money, it's usually a trap, a scam, or a survey. Nobody moved an inch. Then Shang Yang quietly raised the reward to 50 gold. Now the crowd buzzed, doing mental math and side-eyeing each other. Finally, one guy thought, worst case, I look dumb. Picked up the log and marched it through town to the north gate. In front of everyone, Shang Yang paid him immediately. No excuses, no paperwork, no budget issues. Just a heavy bag of metal. That silly log proved something serious. This new government might be harsh, but when it promised reward or punishment, it absolutely meant it. With that credibility, Shang Yang launched full reforms. The famous 20-rank military merit system, detailed land registers, and strict performance-based rewards. Titles now tracked numbers. Bring back enemy heads, capture prisoners, or increase grain output. Move up the ladder. Fail and stay stuck. Nobles lost automatic privileges. In theory, a nobody peasant could outrank a blue-blood lord if the battlefield scorecard favored him enough. Households were reorganized into small groups with collective responsibility. If someone in your cluster broke the law, everyone paid. Silence became risky. Reporting crimes earned points. Ignoring them could mean punishment. Overnight, gossip morphed into a survival tool. Legal codes were standardized, carved into bamboo and stone. Punishments were brutal, mutilation, hard labor, but at least grimly predictable. Modern economists might say Shang Yang aligned incentives and rationalized administration. People on the ground probably called it hell with spreadsheets. Shang Yang himself was eventually executed under the same laws he built, torn apart by carts. But the system stayed firmly in place. By the time King Zheng took power, he inherited a Jian already optimized for war. Taxes, conscription, surveillance, and grain all flowing. Generals planned campaigns on relief maps, moving wooden markers for armies and supply depots like pieces in a very bloody board game. Qin strategists pushed a concept summarized as ally the distant, strike the nearby, isolate each neighbor instead of fighting everyone together. Diplomats and spies worked behind the scenes, bribing enemy ministers to argue against alliances or to recommend disastrous battlefield plans. One famous target was Zhao's great general Li Mu, whose removal by court intrigue opened the door for Qin's invasion of Zhao. While rival courts held chaotic alliance meetings, Qin quietly checked names off its to-do list, turning potential coalitions into disorganized solo opponents. Back home, irrigation projects like the Zheng Canal diverted river water across dry fields, massively increasing grain output for people and soldiers. You can think of it as upgrading the empire's battery. More calories stored in granaries meant more campaigns the state could afford. In workshops, smiths mass-produced standardized iron spearheads, sword blades, and crossbow triggers, turning weapons into interchangeable parts. On training grounds, rows of conscripts drilled in formation, wearing similar armor, executing commands like components in a human assembly line. But the war machine wasn't perfect. Young General Li Xin attacked Chu with too few troops, chasing glory, and got spectacularly crushed. The defeat cost men and prestige. Crucially, it taught King Zheng that courage and optimism weren't enough against huge, still dangerous Chu. So he called in veteran General Wang Jian, who basically said, "Sure, I'll conquer Chu, but only with a truly massive army." Court ministers balked at the numbers, Wang Jian insisted. King Zheng chose the boring answer. He gave the old man the troops he wanted. Wang Jian advanced slowly, building forts, securing supply lines, avoiding traps. No heroic speeches, just careful, grinding demolition of Chu's defenses. Chu eventually collapsed under that pressure. With its biggest rival gone, Qin moved faster against the remaining states, Han, Zhao, and Wei. Yan and Qi fell last. Qi, isolated and hesitant, barely fought. Its king effectively surrendered after realizing all potential allies had evaporated. By 221 BCE, the board was one color. King Zheng rebranded himself as Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified empire. Conquering was one problem, ruling was another. Qin Shi Huang refused to restore old feudal lords who might rebel with local power. Instead, he divided the empire into commanderies and counties run by officials he appointed and rotated, like managers of imperial branch offices. In many areas, 3 different officials shared power: civil, military, and inspector, watching each other so nobody built a personal mini-kingdom. This structure, the Commandery county system, became the default template for later Chinese empires. Strong center, professional administrators, weak local nobility. To make that machine run, Qin standardized writing into small seal script, smoothing out regional character styles and unifying administrative documents. Scribes copied laws and orders in the new style. An official in former Chu could now read instructions from distant Qin without confusion. Weights and measures were unified too. Bronze scales, grain measures, and length standards helped taxes, trade, and court cases run more smoothly. Merchants adjusting to this probably complained at first, but imagine the relief of not recalculating prices in every single former enemy state. Even cart axle widths were standardized, so wheels fit the same ruts on main roads, turning muddy tracks into empire-wide logistics lanes. Qin poured labor into straight roads radiating from the capital Xianyang, like stone-paved circuit traces connecting garrisons, granaries, and local headquarters. In the north, various existing walls were linked into a longer defensive line. An ancestor of the Great Wall focused on steppe raiders. Yamud, all these projects demanded staggering corvée labor. Peasants leaving fields for months, sometimes years, to move earth and stone under strict overseers. On top of that, the emperor ordered a vast underground tomb complex, complete with rivers of mercury and a model palace for the afterlife. The famous Terracotta army was part of that plan. Thousands of clay soldiers, chariots, and horses standing in formation beneath the ground. To modern tourists, it's breathtaking art. To the laborers who built it, it probably looked like the world's least fun construction job. Qin's control extended to ideas too. The regime ordered many privately held books burned, especially those considered politically dangerous or subversive. Officials cataloged and destroyed texts, enforcing an official version of history and thought. It felt less like a tantrum, more like a purge. Later, Confucian accounts added dramatic stories of scholars buried alive, turning Qin into the ultimate villain in China's intellectual origin myth. Modern historians debate how literal those stories are, but agree on this. The regime deeply distrusted intellectual autonomy and alternative narratives. So how does a state this strong collapse so fast? Short answer: everything is centralized and almost nobody is allowed to say no. Years of heavy taxes, forced labor, and harsh penalties built walls and palaces, but also layers of quiet rage among peasants and soldiers. While traveling on inspection tours, Qin Shi Huang grew increasingly obsessed with omens and immortality quests, and eventually died far from the capital. His sudden death terrified the entourage. Eunuch Zhao Gao and Minister Li Si feared chaos, so they decided to edit reality. They forged imperial orders, sidelined the capable heir, Fu Su, and convinced him to kill himself, clearing the way for a more controllable successor. The throne went to Hu Hai, later known as the Second Emperor, young and insecure, a perfect puppet for officials steering the system. Under his rule, the regime kept demanding labor and obedience while legitimacy crumbled. The machine still worked, but nobody trusted the driver anymore. The legalist bureaucracy dutifully transmitted bad policies across the empire, with almost no institutional brake pedal for local officials to push. Rebellions broke out. Ex-soldiers like Chen Sheng and Wu Guang rallied desperate people using a simple message: anything is better than this. Soon strongmen like Shang Yu and Liu Bang turned anti-Guan anger into full civil war, carving the empire into rival zones of control. Within a few years, the Qin capital was captured, the royal line wiped out, and the first imperial dynasty ended in flames and rubble. Yet the story doesn't stop there. The Han dynasty kept Qin's skeleton: Commanderies, standardized script, many legalist practices wrapped in gentler rhetoric. Later empires mixed Confucian morality talk with legalist administrative muscle, but the basic architecture, strong center, bureaucratic grid, stayed remarkably Qin-like. So what was Qin Shi Huang, really? Monster, genius, or just the very intense human face of a much bigger institutional machine? Today, when states and companies build systems tracking movements, purchases, and connections, they're chasing a familiar dream: see more, predict more, control more. Perfect information promises safety and efficiency, but as Qin showed, a powerful system with no buffers can also shatter very quickly. Maybe Qin was version 1 of the strong state idea. Every new technology update just adds more sensors, not automatically more wisdom. The real question for us isn't whether we have Qin-level power, but whether we've finally learned how to install better brakes.